In a lavish tent, King Saul, the ruler of Israel, sat slumped in his chair, the weight of a nation pressing down on his shoulders. He buried his head in his hands, a picture of pure exhaustion and despair. The taunts of the Philistine giant Goliath had echoed for 40 days, chipping away at the morale of his entire army. He looked up, his eyes weary, expecting another terrified soldier or a grim-faced general. Instead, he saw a boy, a teenager, barely a man, with a shepherd's staff in his hand and a look of unshakable resolve on his face. Saul sighed, a sound heavy with disappointment. "You?" he asked, his voice raspy. "You're the one who spoke against the giant?" He had heard whispers of someone accepting the challenge, but he never imagined it would be a youth who hadn't yet seen a real battle. The boy, David, stood tall, his voice clear and ringing with a confidence that seemed utterly out of place amidst the fear gripping the camp. "Let no man's heart fail because of him," David declared, his words a direct challenge to the king's own despair. "Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul couldn't help but shake his head, a sad smile touching his lips. The boy's courage was admirable, but foolish. "You are not able to go against this Philistine," he explained, his tone almost fatherly. "You are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. He will crush you." It was a simple, brutal fact. Goliath was a seasoned warrior, a mountain of a man clad in bronze armor. David was a shepherd boy, but David was undeterred. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the king's, burning with an intense focus that was startling. He wasn't speaking with the bravado of an inexperienced youth, but with the certainty of a man who knew his own strength. "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep," he began, his voice steady. "And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after it and struck it." As he spoke, the scene shifted in Saul's mind. He could almost see it, a young David, not with a sword and shield, but with his simple staff and sling, fearlessly defending his flock from a savage lion, wrestling the beast to protect a single helpless lamb. David's voice brought Saul back to the present. "I killed both the lion and the bear," he stated, not as a boast, but as a matter of fact. "And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God." The final words were spoken with a righteous fire. This wasn't about personal glory for David. It was about defending the honor of his God. Saul stared at the boy, truly seeing him for the first time. He looked past the youthful face and the simple shepherd's clothes. He saw fire in David's eyes that he hadn't seen in any of his hardened soldiers. It wasn't the fire of arrogance or recklessness. It was the fire of absolute faith. A quiet awe began to replace Saul's doubt. He spoke softly, almost to himself, repeating David's logic. "The Lord, who delivered you from the paw of the lion, ... double quotes, David finished the thought, his voice unwavering. "He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." The conviction in those words was a thunderclap in the quiet tent. It was a faith so pure and so powerful that it cut through Saul's own fear and uncertainty. A decision was made. Saul slowly rose to his feet, standing tall for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He looked at the young shepherd who stood before him, a giant in spirit if not in stature. A flicker of hope was rekindled in the king's heart. "Go," Saul said, his voice now firm and clear, "and the Lord be with you." Saul looks at David, this young shepherd boy, full of fire and faith, and a sense of responsibility washes over him. He can't just send this boy out to face a giant with nothing but a prayer. He says, "But you cannot go like that. You need protection." He calls for his armor bearers. They come forward, struggling under the weight of Saul's own personal armor. A massive bronze helmet, polished to a mirror shine, and a heavy coat of mail, each link expertly forged. This isn't just any armor. It's the king's armor, a symbol of power, of the kingdom itself. They begin to dress David. The heavy coat of mail is draped over his small shoulders. You can see David's knees buckle slightly under the sheer weight of it. It's built for a king, a warrior seasoned in battle, not a boy who has spent his days tending sheep. Then comes the helmet. They place it on his head, and it's so large it immediately slides down, covering his eyes and plunging him into darkness. The world is muffled, distant. He can't see. He can barely stand. He tries to take a step, to feel what it's like to be a soldier in the king's armor. The metal clanks loudly, an unfamiliar, cumbersome sound. He stumbles, off balance, the weight threatening to pull him to the ground. This isn't protection. It's a prison of bronze and iron. He struggles, his voice muffled from under the helmet. I cannot walk with these. I have not tested them. Think about what he's saying. I have not tested them. This isn't about pride. It's about experience, about authenticity. David has spent his life learning to be quick, agile, to rely on his wits and his speed. This armor negates all of that. It forces him to be something he's not, to fight in a way he doesn't understand. He's not a walking fortress like Goliath. His strength lies elsewhere. And in that moment, under the crushing weight of the king's expectations and the king's armor, he makes a crucial decision. With a grunt of effort, he lifts the oversized helmet off his head, blinking in the light of the tent. Freedom. He begins to unbuckle the heavy coat of mail, letting the straps fall away. He shrugs it off his shoulders, and it crashes to the ground with a deafening thud. He looks at the king's heavy sword, a weapon meant for a man of Saul's stature, and lets it drop as well. It clatters beside the discarded armor, and there he stands. Not a soldier, not a prince, but David, a shepherd in his simple tunic, vulnerable, yet completely himself. He looks at Saul, not with defiance, but with a quiet, unshakable certainty. He says, I must fight as myself. This is the turning point. It's a declaration of identity. He won't win this battle by pretending to be Saul, or by trying to match Goliath's strength with conventional weapons. He will win by embracing who he is, by using the skills God has given him, the very skills he honed in the solitude of the fields. He bends down, not for the king's sword, but for his own familiar wooden staff, its surface worn smooth by his own hand. He picks up his simple leather sling, a tool he knows better than the back of his hand. In a world of bronze and iron, of giants and kings, David chooses wood and leather. He chooses authenticity over imitation. He knows that true strength doesn't come from wearing someone else's armor, but from having the courage to stand in your own skin, trusting the gifts you've been given. With his staff in one hand and his sling in the other, he is ready, not as a poor imitation of a soldier, but as David, the shepherd of Bethlehem. The air is thick with tension. Imagine this, two massive armies perched on opposite hills, a vast valley separating them. For 40 days, a stalemate. For 40 days, a single booming voice has echoed across this valley, a voice filled with mockery and challenge. This is the voice of Goliath of Gath, a champion of the Philistines, a mountain of a man clad in bronze armor, his spear like a weaver's beam. He bellows out his challenge every morning and every evening. Send a man to fight me. If he wins, we will be your slaves. But if I win, you will be our slaves. And for 40 days, the army of Israel, the soldiers of King Saul, have been paralyzed with fear. No one dares to face him. The entire nation is held hostage by terror. But today, something is different. A new figure descends into the valley. He's not a seasoned warrior. He wears no armor, carries no sword. It's David, a young shepherd boy, sent to the battle lines simply to bring food to his older brothers. He heard the giants' taunts. He saw the fear in the eyes of Israel's strongest soldiers. And unlike everyone else, he wasn't filled with fear. He was filled with righteous indignation. How could this uncircumcised Philistine defy the armies of the living God? King Saul tried to dissuade him. He said, "You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David's faith was unshakable. He recounted his experience protecting his father's sheep, how he had fought and defeated both a lion and a bear with his bare hands. He declared, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Seeing his determination, Saul relented. He offered David his own royal armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put them on, but they were too heavy, too cumbersome. He wasn't used to them. He took them off, choosing instead to face the giant with the simple tools he knew best. So now, here he is, walking down the dusty slope into the valley floor. The silence is deafening. Every eye from both armies is fixed on this lone, seemingly defenseless young man. The fate of two nations rests on his shoulders. He doesn't march with the swagger of a trained soldier. He walks with a steady, determined pace. The giant Goliath sees him approaching from a distance. He probably squints, unable to believe his eyes. Is this a joke? After all his challenges, is this boy the best champion Israel can offer? Goliath is insulted, and his laughter, a harsh, grating sound, probably starts to rumble in his chest. But David isn't looking at the giant, not yet. His focus is elsewhere. He walks past the spot where the final confrontation will take place and heads toward a small, clear stream that meanders through the valley, the water gurgling softly over the rocks. It's a sound of life and peace in a place defined by death and war. The sun glints off the surface of the water. He kneels down. The rough fabric of his shepherd's tunic touches the damp earth by the water's edge. Imagine the contrast. Up on the hill, King Saul and his commanders watch, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. On the other hill, the Philistines murmur amongst themselves, pointing and sneering, confident in their champion. And in the center of it all, David kneels, his head bowed, not in prayer at this moment, but in concentration. His gaze is fixed on the stream. He's not thinking about the jeers or the odds stacked against him. He is focused entirely on the task at hand. He reaches his hand into the cool, clear water. The cold is a sharp, grounding sensation. His fingers, calloused from years of tending sheep and playing the harp, sift through the pebbles at the bottom of the brook. He is not just grabbing any rocks. He is being selective. He is a professional, an expert with his chosen weapon, the sling. He knows exactly what he needs. He isn't looking for large, jagged rocks. He's searching for stones that are smooth, rounded, and dense. The kind that will fly true. The kind that will fit perfectly in the pouch of his sling. He picks one up. He turns it over in his palm, feeling its weight, its balance. He inspects its surface, making sure it's free of any imperfections that could throw off its trajectory. This one is good. He places it carefully into his shepherd's pouch, a simple leather bag hanging at his side. Then he finds another, and another. He continues this methodical process, his movements calm and deliberate. There is no rush, no panic. This is a familiar ritual, something he has likely done 1,000 times before while watching his flock. He is in his element. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He selects 5 smooth stones. Why 5? Perhaps it was a practical consideration. Goliath had 4 brothers, also giants, and maybe David was preparing for the whole family. Or maybe it was simply an act of faith, trusting that God would provide what he needed, but also being wisely prepared. He had 1 shot, but he brought 5 opportunities. He was confident, but not reckless. He places the 5th stone in his bag with the others. The little clink they make is a small, solid sound in the vast, waiting silence. With his ammunition secured, he stands up. The water drips from his hand. He wipes it on his tunic. Now his focus shifts. He lifts his head, and his eyes lock onto his target for the first time. There in the distance stands Goliath. The giant has stopped laughing now. He is bellowing insults, his voice a torrent of contempt. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? He roars, gesturing at David's shepherd's staff. Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David is unmoved. He takes his sling in hand. It's a simple weapon, just 2 leather cords attached to a pouch. In the hands of a novice, it's a toy. In the hands of an expert like David, it is a lethal, long-range weapon, capable of delivering a projectile with the speed and force of a bullet. He grips the sling, the worn leather familiar and comfortable in his grasp. He takes a deep breath. The weight of the stones in his pouch is a small, reassuring pressure against his hip. And then he begins to walk. He walks away from the peaceful brook and toward the hulking, armored giant, toward the challenge, toward his destiny. Every step is deliberate, closing the distance between the shepherd boy and the warrior, between faith and fear, between apparent weakness and overwhelming might. The final confrontation is about to begin. The 2 armies watched, a silent sea of tension, as a figure emerged from the Israelite ranks. Goliath, the towering champion of the Philistines, stood waiting, his bronze armor glinting under the harsh sun. He was a mountain of a man, a walking fortress of muscle and metal. As the lone figure drew closer, Goliath squinted. His initial readiness turned to disbelief, and then to outright insult. This wasn't a warrior. This was a boy, a shepherd by the looks of him, armed with nothing more than a simple staff. A deep, rumbling laugh erupted from Goliath's chest, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed across the valley. Am I a dog? He boomed, his voice dripping with contempt. That you come at me with sticks? The Philistine soldiers roared with laughter, the sound a wave of derision, crashing against the silent Israelites. Goliath's face twisted into a sneer. He raised his massive spear and pointed it at the boy, his eyes blazing with fury. He began to curse, invoking the names of his gods, Dagon and Ashtoreth, calling down every vile and terrible fate upon this young shepherd who dared to insult his might. Come here, boy. Goliath roared, his voice a thunderclap that promised violence. Come to me, and I will feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. The threat hung heavy in the air, a gruesome promise from a man who had the power to make it a reality. Any other man would have trembled, would have turned and fled, but the boy David did not. He stopped, a small solitary figure standing before the behemoth. The contrast was staggering. David looked like a sapling before an ancient oak, a pebble before a mountain. But then David spoke, and his voice, though it came from a smaller frame, was astonishingly powerful. It cut through the air with a clarity and confidence that silenced the mocking laughter. It was a voice that held no fear, only unwavering conviction. You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, David called out, his words ringing across the battlefield. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. He wasn't just speaking to the giant. He was making a declaration to everyone watching, to the heavens and the earth. He was reframing the entire conflict. This wasn't about a boy versus a giant. It wasn't about a staff versus a spear. It was about the gods of the Philistines versus the one true God of Israel. A hush fell over the valley. Every soldier, Philistine and Israelite alike, was now transfixed, listening to this shepherd boy's incredible proclamation. David then raised his hand and pointed a steady finger directly at the giant, an act of astonishing boldness. His voice rose, filled with a divine authority that seemed impossible for one so young. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. The words were not a hope or a prayer, but a statement of fact. David continued, his voice resonating with prophetic power, and I will strike you down and take your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the camp of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." He turned his gaze for a moment, sweeping it across the assembled armies, his own people, and the enemy. "Then all this assembly shall know," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, "that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." The challenge had been made. The lines were drawn, not in the sand of the valley, but between faith and brute force, between the divine and the profane. The air crackled with anticipation. Goliath, momentarily stunned by the boy's audacity, let out another roar, this time of pure rage. The mockery was over. The battle was about to begin. Goliath let out a monstrous roar, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the valley. Each of his colossal steps sent tremors through the ground as he charged forward, a walking mountain of muscle and bronze. The Philistine army roared with him, a wave of sound crashing against the terrified ranks of the Israelites. But David didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. Instead, he did the unthinkable. He ran. He sprinted toward the battle line, closing the distance between himself and the giant, a shepherd boy racing to meet a demigod of war. As he ran, his hand dipped into the simple leather pouch at his side. His fingers, calloused from years of tending sheep and practicing with his sling, closed around a single smooth stone. It was an ordinary stone, one of 5 he had picked from the brook, but in that moment it was to become a weapon of legend. With practiced ease, he nestled the stone into the pouch of his sling. The air grew thick with anticipation. The world seemed to slow down. David began to whirl the sling above his head. The leather cut through the air with a menacing whoosh, once, twice, 3 times, building momentum, building power. Across the field, Goliath raised his spear, its bronze tip gleaming like a malevolent star, ready to skewer the audacious boy. Just as the giant prepared to throw, David released one end of the sling. The stone shot forward, a blur of gray against the sky. It flew with the speed of an arrow, a silent missile screaming toward its target. The sound it made was a sharp, vicious zip that was almost lost in the roar of the crowd. And then a sickening crack echoed across the valley, a sound sharper and more terrible than any clash of swords. The stone had found its mark. It struck Goliath squarely in the center of his forehead, embedding itself deep in the bone. The giant stopped dead in his tracks. His forward momentum ceased instantly. His massive spear slipped from his grasp and clattered to the ground. A look of pure, utter confusion spread across his brutish features. His eyes, which had been burning with rage just a moment before, went wide with shock. A low, guttural grunt escaped his lips, the only sound he could manage. He swayed on his feet, like a mighty oak tree that had been struck by lightning. For a moment he teetered, his body fighting a battle his mind had already lost. Then, with a final earth-shattering boom, he fell. Timber, the giant crashed face-first into the dirt, the ground groaning under his immense weight. A massive cloud of dust and earth exploded into the air, obscuring the devastating sight. And then there was silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the entire valley. Both armies, the cheering Philistines and the cowering Israelites, stood frozen, their voices caught in their throats. They stared, dumbfounded, at the cloud of dust where their champion, their terror, had just stood. Out of the dust cloud, a small figure emerged. It was David. He didn't hesitate. He ran to the fallen giant, and with an agility born of a life in the wilderness, he climbed onto Goliath's back. He reached down and gripped the hilt of Goliath's own sword. The weapon was enormous, almost as tall as David himself. With a grunt of effort, he drew the massive blade from its sheath. He raised the colossal sword high into the air, its polished steel catching the sunlight, a beacon of impossible victory. For another heartbeat, the silence held. Then it broke. A single cheer erupted from the Israelite side, then another and another, until the entire army let out a single deafening roar of pure, unadulterated joy and disbelief. It was a sound of liberation, of hope reborn. Yea-ah! They charged down the hill, a tidal wave of newfound courage, their fear replaced by a ferocious fighting spirit. The Philistines, seeing their invincible champion lying dead in the dirt, were seized by a blind panic. They broke ranks, turned, and fled, their arrogance shattered into a million pieces. So it was that David, a shepherd boy from Bethlehem, prevailed over the Philistine with nothing more than a sling and a stone. He had faced the giant that an entire army feared, not with armor or a sword, but with unshakable faith. The giant was dead, and the courage of one young boy had saved the nation.